We start off with smart people, people with crystal balls, telling us what the future holds. They should have a little asterisk saying, if you follow this, disclosure, don't take my advice. If you take my advice and you go bankrupt, you shouldn't have taken my advice. I'm sure it will say all of that. So I'm going to ask that we perhaps just first take our online presentation, and then we'll come back, and we've got Hugo from Minerals Council with us to present in person, and then we'll have a quick 10 minutes for Q&A. So Robin Griffin, are you with us, Robin? Are you online?
I am.
Robin is Vice President at Wood Mackenzie. That must make you very smart and very clever. We're going to ask you, if you don't mind, to go first, Robin. Hugo will then go after you, and then we'll do Q&A, if that is fine. You're all geared up. We can see your slides, and I've got a 25-minute ticker in front of me. Hopefully, you've timed yourself accordingly. If necessary, I may have to stop you so that we can also get to the other presentation. Thank you for joining us, and please proceed.
Great, thanks very much, Bernard, and hi everyone. It's a real pleasure. Yeah, please stop me if I go on too long. I'm basically let me show you the disclaimer. Bernard just mentioned it, so I should show it to you. I won't go back to it. I have a number of slides. What I wanted to do was to kind of look very briefly at what the near-term outlook is across a suite of metals and mining commodities. Perhaps give some ideas around why the outlook is different, where there are areas of interest. And then I'm just going to look a little bit longer term and just give a bit of an update on energy transition and some of the issues that we see that are sort of coming down the line. And just give some general overview on how we feel about mining, which is pretty positive. I think you'll find. So let me just start with a couple of comments on the near term. What I'm showing here is essentially just a comparison of the industry cost, so the industry marginal cost versus the price. So it's kind of a proxy for an operating margin for the industry. Probably the most important symbol is the triangle, which is the average forecast price for this year. And you can see essentially that across most metals and bulk commodities, we are showing, pretty positive margins at the industry level. Now, this is the margin at the 90th centile, at almost the marginal cost. So, for everyone else on the cost curve that's below that, the margin will be larger. Nickel and steel are the kind of two outliers. Probably anyone who's following prices will know that those metals have been struggling. Steel probably because it's paying such, those Chinese steel makers are paying a fortune for iron ore. We'll get onto nickel in a minute. You'll notice that whilst lithium, the spot price is kind of at the break even at the moment, we do have contract prices being quite positive for the remainder of the year. Part of that is the lag between spot and contract pricing in that market. So we're broadly positive. Hugo's going to talk about the reasons why from economic perspective, but certainly we know things at the moment at the peak of the interest rate cycle is tough from a demand perspective, but we do expect things to improve. When we look 3 years down the line, I'll just make a couple of comments between the commodities. Essentially, we're thinking that base metals will essentially keep hold of most of the recent gains. So copper does start to decline, but from a price that is extremely good at almost, well, it's above that now, but this is our average 2024 price. Nickel and lithium those metals are essentially struggling with a supply issue. Nickel's China controlled, typically out of Indonesia, but that pipeline of supply is still very strong, and we're expecting that to continue to be a bit of a weight on that nickel market. Lithium, the price is already down at 70% of current price. So lithium could kind of stay where it is and still, from a contract basis, show this. But again, pipeline in China is very, very strong, and the Chinese miners don't typically respond to price signals. And so that's a bit of an issue for us at the moment. And then met coal and iron ore, again, is a supply recovery issue. Both those markets have struggled, and China's going into a structural decline as well, which means we think those prices are going to fall. So we get the question quite often, in the midterm at least, why is the energy transition not having a bigger impact on pricing? And the short answer is that for most metals, apart from the battery raw materials, the energy transition demand is only a very small share of total demand. So for copper, it's significant, 3 million tons. It's going to grow, it's going to double in the next 6 years, but it's only about 8% of total copper demand. So, and that's true of pretty much all of the steel alloys, aluminium, even nickel is only about 16% energy transition demand. So they're going to have to follow macro trends in the near term. Eventually that will change, but in the near term, they're still going to be cyclical, and it's going to be the economy that really drives those outcomes. So let's have a bit of a look at the energy transition. And our base case hasn't actually changed, and I think I showed this last year, and essentially we're still looking at about a 35% reduction in energy-related emissions over the long term to 2050. That's the dotted line on the right-hand side. So broadly consistent with 2.5 degrees of warming. You can see that to get to 2 degree and the net zero, 1.5, is an enormous acceleration in emissions reduction. A lot of people are losing confidence in the pace of change, and so we do have a delayed scenario, which is about 2.7. That may become the base case. There are a whole array of issues surrounding the transition that is really constraining the pace and making the possibility of hitting a net zero by 2050 outcome very, very difficult. And I won't go into all of these, but if you think about the sorts of things that need to work in concert, you need a whole range of policies which need to be aligned. And of course, that's very difficult globally. And of course, it's difficult when you're voting in elections, and this has become a political issue. We need to absolutely maximize scrap. We know there's going to be huge growth in secondaries, but it's going to be slow, and we're never going to get to the point where we don't need primary supply. Good for us, good for you, but not necessarily good for the transition. And we need a whole bunch of technologies to come together to reduce our demand for metals, but also to allow hydrogen, green hydrogen, to become cheap enough to decarbonize different technologies. Of course, we need primary supply, and that's probably what I'll focus most on because that's what's most important. But ultimately, you also need societal buy-in. I think Bernard mentioned that people don't want mining. They certainly want the energy transition on the whole. Not everyone, but a lot of people do, but they don't want mining, and they haven't quite worked out that there's really, that those two are inextricably linked. So I'll try and speed up because I realise I'm taking a bit of time. But I mean, one of the things that makes life difficult is that the energy transition is so metals intensive. And I'll just draw your eye to one comparison. That's copper in offshore wind versus copper in a coal-fired power station. It's about 5 times the intensity per gigawatt. But when you actually factor in capacity factors, which are probably a third, maybe that's a little harsh, but let's call it a third. For offshore wind, you're looking at 12 to 15 times the copper. So we're leveraging from fossil fuel to metal, and I guess you've got to ask the question about whether that's sensible. But of course, what it does do is generate this enormous potential demand And this chart is just showing the next 10 years. And you can see that the battery raw materials, BRMs, have got them here, have pretty amazing growth rates. I mean, if you've been in base metals your whole life, this is pretty astonishing. We have reduced these slightly over the last 12 months, but you look still over 12-13% for lithium, and for nickel, pretty solid at 5.5%. And you look even copper, which we've got 2.5%. That's 6 million tons of growth, and that's not to be sniffed at, as we say over here. But when you actually apply capital intensity to these numbers to actually bring this metal to market, you get an idea of just the difference in the scale of these commodities, and probably doesn't surprise you to see copper so strong there. I mean, it's high in capital intensity anyway, but of course it's going to accelerate as infrastructure grows. So as transmission grows, particularly in that sort of 2030 to 2040, and you're going to get an offshore wind spike through that period too. So which is extremely copper intensive. So copper does extremely well. You can understand why BHP is looking to acquire, tier 1 copper assets. Doesn't want to wait the 11 years it takes miners to develop these assets. But you're looking at about $1.2 trillion over those 3 years. Now that's at current capital intensities. And of course, one of the things we've had to deal with is this huge capex escalation. The right-hand chart is showing a copper example. That's just based on projects that are in our database that haven't really changed scope. If you were costing something in 2015, it would now be 60% more expensive to build. And so we can't really predict how that's going to go, but that 700 billion we've got for copper could be considerably higher. We are expecting OPEX to be flatter than it has been. That sort of the end of the inflation cycle, we think, is pretty close. But problem is we're not spending enough, and this chart is just an idea of our committed capital over the next 7 or 8 years. The grey bars are showing what we think you would need to spend under our base case in the dark grey, and then under the net zero case. And you can see we're pretty much half of where we need to be, and we have come close in 2012, but of course this is kind of required for the next 25 years. So the ask is enormous, and there are all manner of impediments to that investment rate, not least companies sending a lot of capital back to shareholders, spending a lot on decarbonisation as well. And so the capital for growth is a little limited. And so what actually happens is that if you compare demand to 2030 with committed supply, you get a chart like this, which is showing that pretty much every base metal and the battery raw materials except cobalt under our base case, that there is a notional shortage. Now, of course, the shortage probably won't occur, but it's a notional shortage. We need an acceleration in FID for major projects to close these gaps. And it's about 2.5 million tons of copper, even for our base case, remember. So our base case is 2.5 degree. If you then look at the net zero case, then you're pretty much doubling the requirement for copper, tripling it for aluminium. Even cobalt becomes a major issue because you need everything everywhere all at once, essentially, to get us on that path. I don't know how interested you are in coal and iron ore, but you can probably ask me afterwards. We can chat about those commodities. But obviously they're on a different trajectory under that sort of transition. So I mean, these things are well known by people in the industry. I'm sure people in the audience absolutely understand the difficulties associated with bringing this primary supply on. Governments kind of get it. Certainly in Australia, at the working level, there seems to be an understanding. And so we've got this huge proliferation in policy to drive critical mineral strategy. And I mean, a lot of it's to really to remove China as much as possible from the supply chain. So it's not, you don't really know whether they understand the difficulty and the impact that this might have on the energy transition. Australia is trying to step up, but the question always is it enough? And you know, they've just allocated 23 billion over 10 years. Most of that is going to go to hydrogen, green hydrogen, and $2 a kilo production credit, which is all very well, but our estimate cost for hydrogen is over $8 a kilo. You need somewhere between $2 and $3, maybe $1.5 to $3 to make it competitive into steel. And so you can see that we're still a long way off where we need to be for, you know, deep growth in hydrogen. The problem is China's so much more competitive, and so Australia is now about to release a carbon border adjustment mechanism like Europe, because they understand now that they're going to have to, if we want processing, we're going to have to support those developers to bring it online, and then there's going to have to be ongoing support, because it is very, very difficult for a country like Australia to compete with cheap capital from from Saudi, from China, in places where they have access to cheap renewables too, for instance, like the Middle East and potentially in Africa. I mean, we don't think that it is going to be possible to remove China, and in fact, it would probably be easier if we were able to collaborate and work together to bring these metals online. This is an example of demand versus supply in North America and Europe over the next 10 years. So we're trying to give an idea here of how self-sufficient they will be. And even with the IRA in place, you can see that North America's a long way off being able to supply its own demand. Europe is similar, except perhaps for cobalt and nickel. And then China, we think, will continue to remain the supplier with huge amount of excess capacity in its supply chains. Excess capacity, I might add, which is creating some of the problems we're seeing with prices across battery raw materials. Okay, I'm almost done, Bernard. What I will do is say that just ending on carbon tax as a potential for helping countries like Australia, other countries that are at a cost disadvantage. People talk about green premia. We are pretty skeptical about the ability for miners to get access to green premia. Carbon taxes could solve that, but what it will do is create distortion in cost curves. And again, copper actually tends to do pretty well when you compare its emissions with aluminium. And at very high carbon prices, aluminium is completely transformed. But what it does do in a cost curve is, if you are low carbon, you will tend to shift down the cost curve as carbon prices increase. And so there are opportunities for low carbon users as we go through the energy transition. Okay, I've said enough. Sorry if I took too long.
No, thank you.
Thanks very much for listening.
Robin, what worries me is you've left more time for Hugo, so that really worries me. But let's stick with there are lots of questions coming through, but let's stick with the plan to let Hugo present next, and then we'll do a joint Q&A if that works for you. Thank you very much.
That's fine. Should I stop sharing?
No, you need to do nothing, I am sure. Hugo just needs to come and present now, but he's waiting for a personal invitation from me. So you stay online if you don't mind, and we'll be back with you in 25 minutes max, Hugo. 25 minutes max. Can you make eye contact with the timer over there?
Ek sien hom.
Good, okay.
If I can just get my slides up, please.
Hugo, slides, please. An economist is going to present without slides. This should be fun.
Nightmare.
This should be fun. On the one hand, we could talk about this commodity.
Well, let me just say good morning.
You need to press something. There's lots of arm waving taking place here. There's somebody coming to the front. This looks promising. Are you bringing us the cricket score? What is happening? We've now got a black screen. That's progress, I think. We've got Robin back. That's not progress. Robin, nothing personal, but we keep on getting your face instead of the slides. Yeah, my AV team, this is all we can afford. This is what you guys get for having a cheap conference, an affordable conference. This would never happen where you pay in dollars. So next year we're going to charge you dollars and upgrade.
There we go.
Okay, so we're all set, and we'll go over to Hugo Pinaar now presenting. He's, I think he may be the chief economist or some fancy title at the Minerals Council of South Africa. Hugo, please take it on.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to do it a bit differently. So after this, I think, very nice global sort of perspective, I'm going to try and zoom in a bit more on South Africa-specific commodities. And we're also going to do it a bit different, and I'm going to show you the sort of trends in rand terms. Of course, for a domestic producer, we actually want to look at these commodities in local currency terms. So sort of setting the scene, what has happened over the last 18 months or so in some of the key commodities for South Africa. And then hopefully this will tie in, whereas Robin showed you from the supply side the outlook, I'm going to focus more on the demand side. So broadly speaking, the outlook for global industrial activity and growth in the near term. And I'll also say something about the rand, given that we start with these commodities in local currency. Let's say something about the near-term rand outlook. So to start, we're going to focus on those four commodities, so gold, iron ore, coal, and the PGMs. And what we're going to do on this slide is, to just briefly explain it, I'm going to index all of these commodities to a level of 100 on the final day of 2022, just so that we could put all of them on one scale and compare. The shaded area in the chart is so far this year. And then we have that horizontal 100 line. So if the commodity line is above 100, we are increasing since December 2022, below 100, the opposite. Now, to prevent Bernard from chasing me away, I'm going to start with gold. Yes, so that is what has happened to the gold price in rand terms over the last 18 months or so. So you can see we are up quite handsomely. And importantly, this is despite a pretty strong dollar and higher global interest rates, which under normal circumstances you would not see the gold price going up in those circumstances. Sorry, I should have said the rand on average weakened by about 12% against the US dollar last year. So clearly that is also supporting this chart in rand terms, but it's much more than that, of course. It's the actual dollar gold price that's sitting at an all-time high as we speak. So what is driving this? To a large extent, it seems to be a central bank buying, for example, out of China. So this is, I think, in the context of all of these geopolitical tensions we are seeing, so especially in emerging markets, central banks are trying to diversify their reserves into other assets away from currencies, and in particular the dollar, and they're going into gold to a large extent. And of course, this is on top of the normal investor demand that for gold, the sort of safe haven demand that you tend to see during times of uncertainty. Here we have the copper price. So copper, of course, is not such a big deal for South Africa in terms of export revenue. Of course, we know there's interesting developments in the Northern Cape province, but for now it's quite a small chunk of our exports. But I just thought, out of interest, to put this there. And what is interesting is how closely copper and gold has actually tracked over the last 18 months, albeit, of course, for very different reasons. I won't go into the reasons. I think Robin has sort of detailed that quite nicely. Then we move to iron ore. Of course, South Africa, important iron ore producer. So this has been very volatile over the past 18 months or so, and I think to a large extent tied with gyrating expectations of what's going to happen in China, and in particular stimulus measures coming out of the Chinese economy. And as that speculation sort of moves, you tend to see the iron ore price react. So over this period, iron ore is up, but not nearly to the same extent as gold and copper. So that's sort of the good news in terms of the South African-based commodities. If we then look at some of the difficulties, now those of you who attended the Platinum Industry Day, what was it, a month and a half ago or so, there was a lot of talk about these low prices, of course, and you can see it over there, so sharply down, especially in the first half of last year. I guess if you want to see the glass as half full, you say, well, it does look as though these prices have sort of reached a bottom. They've sort of stabilizing at this lower level. Just bear in mind, we're looking at the basket price here. So I've included platinum, rhodium, and palladium, and again in rand terms. So I guess we know the story by now. Here, it's very much the uncertainty in terms of the global vehicle sector going forward. This sort of mix, how quickly or how fast, sorry, is the transition from internal combustion engines into electric vehicles. Of course, a lot of hype on electric vehicles for quite some time. That does seem to have softened a bit, especially in Europe and in the US. Some pushback from consumers on, be it charging infrastructure, the range that you can get with EVs, and then, of course, the price. But it's a totally different story in China. I mean, there's just the absolute boom in the production of electric vehicles, and they are sort of flooding the market at this stage. And to such an extent, of course, that recently we saw the Biden administration saying that they're going to increase the tariffs on EV imports. And you can bet your bottom dollar if Mr. Trump does win the November elections, I think this will be you may even see more of that. So that's very briefly on the PGM scenario. If we then look at coal, so also down sharply. That, of course, does come from very elevated levels in 2022 when Russia invades Ukraine, energy problems in Europe. Suddenly they want to shift back to coal, and you see this sort of tremendous price increase. That turned around sharply last year, and these prices remain at these sort of lower levels. If I can just digress for a moment to say that from a South African perspective, yes, the global sentiment towards coal is not great, but in terms of our exports, we continue to see quite a bit of demand out of Asia for South African coal, especially from India. And interestingly enough, of late, we're also starting to see increased interest from Japan for South African coal, and that's sort of a function of them wanting to diversify away from Australia, for example, where at this stage they get 60% of their coal. Another digression, just on the South African electricity situation, and just to make the point that a sustained improvement in Eskom's operational performance will, of course, be to the benefit of the domestic coal sector, given how much of our coal is used by Eskom. So what we have here is the energy availability factor from Eskom. So that percentage of the installed capacity that is available at any point or at a given point in time. And that dark thick line is what we've seen so far this year. So the first 20 weeks of this year relative to the same period in previous years. And there you can see the numbers. So we've certainly seen a nice uptick in that factor, which of course is the key reason why we've had 50+ days without load shedding. Now, you of course had the Mythbusters session to end yesterday, and Bernard has touched on the diesel story. So just to bust that myth, Eskom is not burning more diesel. In fact, they are burning much less diesel than this time last year. So this improvement is not a diesel story. It is actually a real plant performance starting to improve, given increased maintenance over the last 12 months or so. So long may it last. So I must say, I don't think this is a election gimmick. We think there is there's real progress being made. I think on the NHI we may say something else on that signing, but this seems to be quite real. Right. Let me then end with this section, just to also add the Brent crude oil price. Now, of course, we don't export crude, but this is a very important input cost, of course, if you are a miner in South Africa. So just to give you a sense of how, in rand terms, the oil price has tracked some of these export commodities. So it is up over this period, but thankfully not too dramatically. Right, so let's then move to a bit of the outlook. And what we want to do here is just to give you a sense of what is happening to industrial activity in the world. And we do this by looking at the so-called PMIs, or the Purchasing Managers' Indices. So this is a sort of very current indicator of manufacturing activity. And what we have here is the global indicator for that. So this is an index. We want this index to be above that horizontal 50 line. That means that we are expanding in terms of activity. And you can see it's not particularly strong on a global level, but that indicator has sort of picked up in recent months. So let's give you a regional perspective on that. In Europe, it's sort of tracking up, but we're still sitting below that 50 line. So Europe still remains a bit of a struggle in terms of overall growth, but then also in terms of industrial activity. In the US, it has picked up somewhat. We're sort of around that 50 mark. China, similar story. We are starting to pick up. There we're actually just above the 50 mark. But then I think two countries that increasingly we need to be focusing on in terms of the medium-term outlook for commodity demand is one in Indonesia. So their PMI is well above that 50 level. And then even more so, look at the Indian manufacturing PMI, so way above 50, so suggesting quite aggressive growth in their manufacturing sector. Now, I think if we keep these trends in mind, and we then move to the IMF or the International Monetary Fund's latest medium-term forecast for real GDP growth, and I just look at those countries that we showed on the previous slide to give you a sense of their outlook. Just want to make a couple of points here. The one is in the US. So I think it's quite remarkable that forecasters are saying that real GDP growth in the US could be faster this year than we had last year. And this is, of course, despite very high interest rates still, and inflation that has certainly moderated quite nicely, but that remains above the Fed's target. So this is, clearly an important underpin for global growth, the sustained robustness that we're seeing in the US. Another important trend, and this speaks to the India-Indonesia story, look at these numbers in terms of what we saw the last 5 years up till 2022 in terms of growth rates relative to the medium-term outlook. So something to certainly be concerned about, I guess, if you are, certainly if you're in the iron ore market, for example, is the growth in China and the slowdown in the growth rate expected there, which is quite significant. So we haven't seen on average Chinese real GDP growth rates of below 4% in decades, right? So if this does materialize, and of course we're already moving towards that, it does signal a fundamental change in, let's call it, the incremental demand growth for commodities coming from China. Of course, the economy keeps on getting bigger, so does it mean everything collapses? Certainly not. But again, it means that incremental demand from China is certainly not growing or expected to grow at the same extent as what we become used to. But I think importantly, probably not fully, but that slowdown, if we look at the Indian growth, for example, again, to make the point, it's likely to at least somewhat be caught up by what we see in India and other emerging markets with large populations, such as Indonesia as well. Just out of interest, I thought to put the South African numbers there and to depress you so early in the morning. So you can see we've certainly underperformed. This is nothing new over the last 6 years or so relative to those set of countries. A general expectation is that South Africa could grow at around between 1.5% this year. I must say, I do think the medium-term forecast there from the IMF at only 1.4%, that is probably too pessimistic where we sit now. So if we can see a sustained improvement in electricity generation, more green stuff coming on stream, along with a continued improvement on the Eskom side, I think that will go a long way to improve that number, along with, move further, or let me not say further, but a rollout of private sector participation on the logistics side, and some of these other constraints that we need to deal with. So I guess if I do get invited back in 3-4 years' time, you can hold me to that. But I suspect if we continue to make the progress that we're starting to see, that number could be closer to 2% on average. Let me then end with interest rates and inflation. Of course, especially from a precious metals perspective, the global inflation and interest rate cycle is quite crucial. So what we have here is the year-on-year change in headline CPI in the US and in Europe. And we can see that those rates of increase have moderated quite significantly from the peaks we saw last year. But especially in the US, we've come down nicely, but we're sort of being stuck above 3% year on year, whereas the Fed or the US Central Bank wants that to be closer to that 2% horizontal line. So it's interesting that we're actually seeing in Europe inflation coming closer to their target, which is also around 2%. I guess one way to think about that is that the general economic activity in Europe is simply much weaker than in the US, which I guess facilitates a faster deceleration in price pressures in Europe. So this sort of different strength of activity and also inflation has, of course, resulted in diverging interest rate expectations. So the general feeling currently is that the European Central Bank will move first in terms of cutting their policy interest rate. And just yesterday, their President, Christine Lagarde, again signaled quite strongly that their first cut could actually come next month at their June meeting, whereas in the US, those expectations have been pushed out, although, again, they are gyrating quite significantly as new data comes in. But as we stand, Europe likely to go first, and as we get closer to the end of the year, we should then start to see the US reduce their policy rate as well. And again, you know, ordinarily, if we start to see that, that should be a bit of an underpin for something like gold and perhaps even the PGM sector. From a currency, from a rand perspective, lower interest rate internationally is, of course, also, or should, all else equal, be a supporting factor. So final two slides, just on the rand. So this is what the currency has done since 2019. That big spike in 2020 was sort of height of COVID panic. Then we saw another spike this time last year. At that stage, Eskom was presenting a very bleak winter outlook, which thankfully did not materialize. But at that time, it dented sentiment, along with the debacle with the Russian ship. Interesting is over the last couple of weeks, we've actually seen the rand strengthening quite a lot against the dollar. And in fact, yesterday it reached a 9-month high of just around 18 rand to the dollar. Now, besides these interest rate expectations, I think what is going on here to a large extent is foreign investors becoming less anxious about our election outcome next week, and in particular, the fact that the ANC is tracking higher in polls. Now, some of you may say, but how is this a positive? It all comes back to stability, right? There was this anxiety if the ANC goes down to 40%, perhaps even lower than that, that may open up the possibility of a national coalition with the EFF, and that could be, I think rightly so, could be quite detrimental for sentiment. So what we've seen is that this sort of tracking of the ANC higher in polls. So this is the Social Research Foundation that has started to do a daily poll, tracker poll, and this is, so every day, you know, you can sort of track where the different parties are heading, and this is just some of the major ones where they are sitting. So I guess what is happening here is investors are saying, well, if this is the outcome more or less in 10 days' time, one of the scenarios could be you have ANC IFP national coalition, and that basically means, to a large extent, the status quo continues. You probably see minor reform momentum continue, and this is good for sentiment and the rand. So to end off, I think this is not a prediction, but just to say if what we see here materializes, I think in the near term you may well see some further rand strength. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugo. Come join us here. Robin, perhaps I can start the conversation with a sort of a question, but I think it may take us to a conversation. Andy Clay comments or asks, is the market worried that most downstream minerals refining technologies in China, unlike oil and gas, where most countries have refineries? You touched on it in your supply-demand graphs, Robin. You want to comment? So we talk about the mining side of things, but in most of these metals, there's a critical in-between step, and that seems to be dominated by China. you're the first person who I've heard ever contemplating collaboration with China. It doesn't sound like that's on the agenda in the elections in the US. So China refining that critical space. So perhaps just a few more comments on that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you look at mining through the midstream, so the processing, refining, and then even further downstream, there's a real squeeze in the middle. I mean, that's the trade, sort of global trade, and I suppose we could take copper for an example. You've got obviously quite widespread mining, but of course all that concentrate's heading to China essentially, or 9 million tons of it. And that's true pretty much across the board. Battery raw materials are extremely concentrated there, rare earths, graphite, etc. And so it's a significant problem because for first users of refined material, they basically kind of have to look to China to get those refined metals, because essentially they're the ones producing them. And if they don't have access to them because tariffs or sanctions are in place, then that becomes inflationary essentially. But the thing that's actually hurting markets at the moment, I mean, is oversupply in that value chain in China. And actually, if you look at the capacity utilization rate, sort of like an overall industrial capacity utilization rate, which they do, the government does show, it's at the same level it was at as in 2016, so which was very low. And 2016, you remember, was the point at which they instigated all of that supply side reform, which completely transformed met coal, coal markets and iron ore markets and various other markets. So that people are watching that very closely at the moment, because the lithium, the EV chain is very oversupplied at the processing level. It's creating weakness actually at the moment through the entire industry. Same for power renewables, for solar, same for electrolyzers, for hydrogen production. I mean, China's building enormous capacity and there's really no demand, or there's not enough demand for it. So I think that's definitely spooking markets at the moment. What people are hoping for is some sort of supply reform which might lead to quite a rapid improvement in outcomes.
Thank you. Nico, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but my next question to you. So India and Indonesia going to grow spectacularly, some high numbers, not quite what China did, but they're obviously different economies and smaller. China, I mean, was so fantastic for the resources industry. Is India's growth so different, or are we going to benefit as miners from that growth? It's the same type of growth.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I think at this stage, the metals intensity of India still has a lot of catch-up work to do to get to where China is now. So no, I don't think even at those rates of growth, the intensity of demand, it will not, I think, fully compensate for slower growth in China, but it will help. I mean, India, Indonesia, other faster growing emerging markets, it will help. But I think China is so, I would sort of say, it's so spectacular. It was so spectacular. It's going to be, I think, quite hard to repeat what we saw there.
Thank you. I want to go to the electric vehicle sales. Many questions. When we talk about slowing down, we talk about slowing down expected growth rates from stupid high to still very high. I mean, can we just talk about, I mean, there's no actual slowdown in electric vehicles. It's a slowdown in growth rate.
Yes.
You agree. So, I mean, that is still the driver of many metals and minerals going into the batteries. No? I mean, it is still high growth, just slower.
So, I mean, I think Robin can also come in here. But, I mean, Bernard, the growth rate has sort of collapsed in global demand. But you are right, it's collapsed from 140%, then it went to 35. I think now it's at, I can't remember what it was last year.
Yeah, but you sound like my son. His marks have collapsed from 95 to 72. Where I came from, that's stupid high. I mean, did you not get the memo? You need 50. So, but we are talking about a collapse in rates, in growth rate.
But perhaps the important point, I think, is rather to say that the outlook. So you go back 2-3 years, people were almost saying that these exponential growth rates will continue over a 5-year view, and that has changed. And I think that's perhaps more important than fixating on exactly what the rate was last year.
Yeah, you want to add to that?
Yeah. If I can, I mean, I agree. I mean, it's when you actually look at the absolute numbers of sales. The change is very small, but of course the base is changing. So the growth rate does look like it's come off. But I would say that there is a genuine concern about saturation of near saturation of demand at current price points. So I think it's more fear than reality. But certainly. I know that OEMs are looking at the next stage of efficiencies to reduce the cost of EVs such that you can continue with this mass market adoption, because at the moment it's kind of the first stage of adoption. I guess you could say early users and early followers, So there is that from an outlook perspective, but when you look at the numbers, your mind is still blown. I mean, the other thing I would say is that there's a bit of fear around nationalism and obviously the tariffs that the US has put on Chinese vehicles. It doesn't really have an impact today, but the fear is that China's extraordinary growth, which is focused quite a bit on export as well, may be harder to continue.
And this all now happens there's a concentration of capacity, especially refining in China. There's a huge demand forecasted for many metals and minerals, and then every nation seems to become nationalistic, parochial, protective. I mean, this makes for a mess. I mean, this is not the time for America to try and make it in America. I mean, this must just result right now in serious misallocation of capital. Do you agree, Robin? I mean, like money that gets spent on projects in America that should not have been built because they already exist in Australia or in China.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's really, really difficult. I mean, we sort of look at it as just a constraint on the potentially constraint on the pace of the transition, because people are or governments and investors are putting money into projects. There's not really a grand plan or alignment of policy that would protect those investments from Chinese competitors down the line without some really major sort of tariffs and sanctions and various other trade constraints. There's real concern about money flowing into projects that because everyone's trying to do the same thing, and they're not really thinking about the bigger picture. But on the other hand, I think it's inevitable that the usual kind of economic measures that we use to determine the success of a project kind of I just don't think they're going to work in a world where China has this huge glut of processing capacity. So, countries have just got to decide, as they do often with strategic issues, to just spend the money and to hell with it. But it's going to be expensive, and politically it's very difficult. I mean, because communities don't really think like that,
Yeah. I want to perhaps put a last question to you, because I've got lots of South African specific questions for Hugo. It's all about the rand. I mean, just tell us what the rand's going to do. But before we get too parochial here, let me just talk about copper. if you sit and listen to Friedland, then there's obviously not enough copper. The world needs more copper. We have never found enough copper. We're never going to find enough copper. The price will go up. Yeah, I mean, of course, but that's not your forecast. So clearly, copper is a potential constraint. Clearly, we need more copper. But how does this play out? Because prices don't go up forever. I mean, there's always a point where something else happens. What is that in the case of copper?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a few things could happen. I mean, it's in transmission. It's always competing with aluminium. So there's a point at which substitution increases, but that can only get you so far. There are technological advances in batteries that will reduce the requirement in EVs. So I'm thinking sort of sodium-ion technologies rather than lithium-ion, which need less copper apparently, and obviously don't need nickel and cobalt. So I think it's, I mean, you would think that there would be a price signal which would generate activity in those other technologies, and that would all work quite nicely. But it probably won't work like that. I mean, I suspect that one technology will sort of come to the rescue, but if it doesn't, then it's really a question of the pace of the transition.
Yeah, that has to give. Yeah.
Yeah, that has to give.
Yeah. No, thank you. Now, obviously, the rest of the day, we're going to hear a lot of junior miners. They have to buy the story of their metal is short, their mineral is short, the price is going to go up all the way to even their projects are going to be viable. So we're going to hear a lot of bullish talk later on. But now, the parochial questions, but the rand, this strong rand that Sandton prays for, every banker talks it up, that's so bad for mining. Just talk us through your rand scenario, your worst case scenario. How strong does the rand become, and do we still have a mining industry then? Hugo.
I would not be concerned that the rand is gonna balloon to 15 to the dollar type thing in the short term. So
you're in Sandton, eh? You're not allowed to say that. Sandton believes we're going to 12. Come on, man.
So I've been hearing the rand's going to 12 for the last 10 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, so I think there are still fundamental factors that will probably put a cap on how far the rand goes. Of course, over the near term, the rand can, as you know, the rand can swing wildly. So we get past this election, the market likes the outcome. There's more ideas that the Fed could start to cut. You put that together, you can tell a compelling story that the rand goes to, I don't know, to 17 to the dollar over the short term. But it's not, it's not obvious that is one, necessarily sustained, and two, that it goes beyond that. Why do I say that? I mean, we still have a fundamental fiscal problem in South Africa. We have debt that is too high. We have lots of spending demands. We've spoken about NHI. We know about grants, etc. So there are, and we're moving into a situation where we're probably again going to have a sustained current account deficit. So these two fundamental factors suggest to you that there's still things that people will worry about in South Africa. So,
yeah. But you know your audience, so you couldn't tell them that all the commodity prices are going to go up. So at least you tell them the rand won't strengthen too badly. So good point. Good, you'll probably walk out safely. There are quite a few specific questions. I don't know if you're in a position to speak about the chrome price and why that seems to be acting weirdly in that it's too strong. Have you got any questions on, any comments on that?
I don't have particular views, but the sense one gets is that the external demand is quite strong at this stage. So I mean, just on that, I mean, despite the Transnet problems, we exported, I think, about 17.5 million tons worth of chrome last year, which was an all-time high, a record high. So I guess that tells you that there is demand out there, and I guess that's feeding into the price. But I'm certainly no expert on that.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we were specifically wanting to share with you some outside perspectives on some of the commodities, the metals, the hotter ones, the future-facing ones. We obviously, in this part of the world, are tied to gold and platinum, even coal, and so we wanted to speak a little bit about that. We can bring either of these guys back in 2 years and rub their noses in they were wrong. Of course they will be wrong. The only forecast, whatever forecast you make, you will be wrong. What is more interesting is the directional, the big picture, the interpretation. Directionally, will things go up forever? Yeah, well, you must be young if you believe that. Similarly, will it go down forever? Well, you must be a young pessimist if you believe that. And so I think it was very useful to evaluate how does things play out in the world, how does this impact. I really want to thank you both, Robin and Hugo. Thank you very much for a very stimulating first session. Thank you for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, guys.